look so excited. All right. Well, let's get in the lecture here. Well, no. Let me go ahead and do a prelim. You guys get a little just special favor since everybody got a holiday, but we do have an exam coming up, right? So, make sure that you're coming with your blue book. Inevitably, somebody does not show up with one, but please come with one. Your 3x5 card, all loaded up with as much information as you can pack on there. I would recommend that you definitely are going over your notes and your readings for the next 48 or so hours and getting as familiar with each one of those test questions as possible. When you get here, everything has to be put away. You've got the entire class time to write on it. It'll be one question. I'll go ahead and put that on the board, broadcast it that way. Usually I hand it out so everybody's got one to work with and you can sit and do an outlines. But since we got those people abroad as well, I'm going to do one that I can just broadcast on the board. You guys can maybe, if you want to pull out a piece of scratch paper, if you want to do an outline, or maybe just do the outline inside the inside cover of your blue book. If you think you need that, if you need something to scratch on. But just be prepared for that question will be up on the board. Yes?
Is it this Wednesday or next Wednesday?
Well, I thought it was this one. Let me double check.
Yeah, I thought it was next Wednesday.
Have I? Well, I'm glad you brought it up. Maybe I read something wrong in my haste to get here. Oops, that's a different class. Yeah, let's. Yeah, I don't want to. Oh, yeah. Boy, I hope I'm not giving you guys some serious angst right now. Day one. Well, this is what I've got. Okay, week 6 in the syllabus. I'm looking at week 6, which we are in, because we just did immigration and the industrial city and stuff like that. So week 6 got day 1 new colonialism, which I'm going to get into. Got the online quiz, and I've got day 2 midterm exam.
Okay, that could have been off the week.
So, pretty positive that's rolling up on us. Just see. So, week 4 was structures of industry, time and discipline, labor. That was when the research prospectus was due. And then we did week 5, which was immigration and the New South. The New South and immigration, such like that. Yeah, we're into week 6, colonialism today, and then midterm on Tuesday. So, but I mean, it's worth it. It's good to ask. I mean, make sure that we're on top of that, and just make sure there's all clarity is out there. So, be sure when you come, I'll get a blue book and a pen. I don't take. What now? Anybody got a blue book in here by chance? Okay, you get them at the bookstore. It looks just like that. Okay, right. Essay book. So you get them down to the bookstore. What are they? What's the cost on them?
I think like 35 cents.
Yeah, they're not that much. And I'd grab a handful because you're going to need some more during the semester for the other exams. So, all right. Well, let's get into this issue of kind of our nation's step into colonialism and globalism. And this is part of what's going on with the midst of industrialization and an expanding nation is that we finally begin to, as a nation, start to look beyond our borders. There's different reasons as to why we do that. In some ways, it's perceived that we have filled up the nation, so to speak, with settlement and such like that, and in order to sustain a rigorous society, that we have to engage in continuous frontiering experiences. Well, we can't frontier anymore if we think of pioneer or expand that way. We can't do that because we've filled up the mainland, so now we start to cast our eyes to other corners of the globe. And so there are these ideas of filling up the nation and end of a frontier, again, coupled with an expanding economy. And if you understand anything about capitalism, which of course is the foundation for our economic system, a strong capitalistic society always has to be expanding and building, right? And that means that we're going to start, like I said, casting our eyes abroad. And where are the new markets going to be? Where are we going to have our new banana plantations or our pineapple plantations or sugar production or coal extraction or what? We're starting to involve ourselves in other countries at this point. And as a result of that, what we've got is a new phase in our nation unlike anything we've ever had before, right? We have, if you think about it, our nation has been in its foundation, a colony that broke away from a mother country, right? And a colony that broke away because it detested the tyranny that came with being a colonial subject. And so think about the reason we came about was for independence, for equality, for all things that you can wrap up in a Declaration of Independence and a Constitution, right? And here's the funny thing is we finally get our feet stable under us, and what's the first thing we do? We end up becoming like England, or we decide that we're going to be a colonizing power. We're going to engage in the things that we, as a nation, broke away from, or our nation was founded on, was a push against colonialism. And now we're finally there. Oh hell, let's do it ourselves. And so I would call this an incredible change of direction. Ideologically, in many ways, for us as a nation, because we're going in this new direction as we engage in colonialism. So what happens is let me go ahead and kind of give us kind of foundation here. Let's start off here with this idea of an overseas expansion. Well, here's a good thing. And I think I alluded to this enough, but let me just make it clear. What's going to happen is that we as a nation are going to have to deal with this expanding outwards, just looking at other places, again, Hawaii, the Philippines, places like this. And as a result, we're going to have to kind of hammer out our new role in the world, not only for other people's, but our own, hammer out what that means to us as a nation. So let's start things off here. What happens is we begin to get into overseas expansion starting in the 1890s. Now, there's a little bit before that goes on, but this is the time when steamship and expansive merchant marines and expanding corporations and things of this nature are starting to reach their grubby paws into different corners of the globe. And as a result of that, what we want to do is, as a nation, is start to gain these island possessions. The Pacific Rim is the major, but it's not the only place that we're starting to do this. This is one of the things that, if you want to think about it, changes us from, let's say, earlier phases of expansion to a new phase. This is a new phase of expansion because in our earlier phases of expansion, think about that westward march of empire, even though it's a flawed concept. But the idea of, pilgrims come here and then the next generation's over the Appalachians, over the Cumberland Gap, and then we're into the Ohio Valley, and then we're into the Trans-Mississippi West, as if we've had this westward march of empire. That's what's defined us. We're not doing that with the idea of that contiguous movement, that is to say, grafting on an adjacent territory onto the nation. Let's say we've acquired land from Mexico, right, through the Mexican War. You don't have to write this down, just get you to think about it. And so what happens is that we acquire that land from Mexico, and then we turn it into a bunch of territories. And that we move into those territories step by step by step, and then ultimately they become a state. But this has all been what we call contiguous. One section connected to another. What's different about this kind of next phase is that we make this big leap, right? It's not like the next territory. It's not over the next mountain range or across the next river. This is like, oh my God, we're going to go ahead and jump the entire Pacific Ocean here. So we're getting involved in a type of expansion, like I said, that it does not involve contiguous lands anymore. And why are we doing it? What do we want these island holdings for? We think about Guam, Midway, again, the Hawaiian Islands, places like this. We want those places for specific purposes. We want them for naval stations. We want them for trading outposts, because we're starting to expand our economy deeper into the Pacific Rim. We want to get into China. We want to get into Japan, places like this. So we need these outposts as trading posts. We need them for naval bases. We need them for commercial centers that link our trade routes from America deep into the rest of the globe. And so for that reason, all of a sudden we look at this, again, this is this new phase. We look at these new efforts in a different way as well. Not only are they not contiguous, connected, right, or next to each other, we are not looking at them in terms of settlement, right? Whereas, again, I come back to the idea, when we think about the mainland, when we're in westward expansion mode, it's all about, well, we're going to turn that thing into a territory, and then that territory, if we get enough bodies on there, it's going to become a state, and they'll go ahead and apply for it, just like Oklahoma Territory became Oklahoma State, or, again, Utah Territory became Utah, or something like this. That was always the end goal, was that it would be a state. It would be a place for settlement, right? We're not looking at these islands this way. They are not looked at as places for settlement. They are merely looked at, again, as these way stations as we expand, right? And so what's going on here is that we are viewing these places as colonies, right? And I'm coming back to, this is the thing that changes us as a nation this way, is that we're not looking at Guam, and early, we're not looking at Hawaii when we seize control of that. We're not looking at them as states in embryo, right? Like we would a territory. A territory basically is a state in embryo, right? Waiting to get enough bodies on there to turn it into a state. We're never looking at that. Well, let's think about it. Is Guam a state? Does it have representation in Congress? How about Puerto Rico? Is Puerto Rico, is it a state? Does it have representation in Congress? Yeah, see? So, but they are a part of the United States in ways, but they are not, they never were looked at as a state in embryo. And so they've always remained in the kind of this undeveloped political status. So, that's just, again, we've got to understand that what we've got here is, and it's something I was referring to earlier, is this new kind of hypocritical idea. Because we were always about opportunity and equality and such like, and now we've jumped into the process of colonization. And it's almost like we've taken our heritage and we're puking it up, right? Think about that. We've taken everything that we've stood for, and now we're doing exactly the same thing that we as a nation, of course, were breaking away and when we were founded. So anyway, so that idea of overseas expansion that way. Views toward expansion. Now, as we are engaging in this process near the turn of the century, you have to understand that we are a society that is divided on this, just as we are divided on many issues. And so there's going to be some people in the nation that are saying, look, what we're doing here in jumping into these island enclaves and controlling these people, they're saying this is wrong. This is an aberration, right? This does not fit within our scope of, as many would think, our scope of being a proper democratic society. So there's, again, people that are saying this is going outside, does not fit in our pattern of past experiences. Others would say the opposite. They would say, no, actually what's going on here is we're expanding into the Pacific and elsewhere, is that we are accomplishing the natural culmination of this process. They're just saying, just because we're making a hop, skip, and a jump over a lot of oceanic miles doesn't mean that we've stopped doing what we've always done. We've always been marching, expanding. We can think about it against the Native Americans. We've been expanding into their worlds and appropriating their land and such. And so that's our manifest destiny, right? That's our destiny as a nation, as a great republic or a great democracy, that we should just continue to do this and expand into other areas, regardless of whether there's ocean or not. So we've got a society that is looking at this from opposite ends, and there's going to be debates. So there's an ideological issue that plays out here. I've got up here as kind of the third point here is catching the spirit of empire. Now, so what is it that gets us as a nation looking beyond our boundaries, looking to get into these other areas of the globe? And it really starts right after the Civil War in many ways, because what's going on is that America does begin to look at beyond its borders because of a growing sense of its own place in a growing international climate. Barriers are beginning to break down, right? Other nation states are beginning to. We're all starting to look in a more international context. what are some of the things that are, in essence, what we're saying is maybe shrinking the globe, right, in some ways? So what is it? What are some of these M factors that are getting us to catch this idea that, ooh, we need to get into this issue of imperialism, right, or internationalism, right? And so we've got to understand some of the things that are factoring into this. What are the M factors? So number one I've got up here is communication, right? When communication is going faster, what that does is, I come back to it, it's shrinking the globe. We've got telegraphs. We will get telephones along the way, undersea cables that are linking us in terms of communication to Europe, and so now we're sometimes in competition, information-wise as well as economic-wise. But think of communication shrinking the globe that way, and that spurs on the idea of growing internationalism. The end of the frontier is something I already just talked about. There's this great ideology in America that our frontier, it has come to an end. And that we need to continue this process of being a frontiering society. I can't remember if we got into it. Just kind of bear with me for a second. When I talked about the American West, there was on the tail end of this. There was an academic by the name of Frederick Jackson. Oh my gosh, I almost lost my glasses. Frederick Jackson Turner. And he created what was known as the frontier thesis. Did I talk about this at all? Does this ring a bell? All right. So he wrote this thesis. It's been the most influential thesis in American history, ever. But it was called the Turner thesis, or the frontier thesis. And what Turner proposed in this thesis is what made America great, what made America democratic, right, as well, was the frontier process. And that frontier process was that you brought these Europeans into the Western Hemisphere. And when they finally got here, they got enough separation from, say, Mother England or Mother France or whatever. But they encountered the frontier, and in America, the things that once defined you in Europe no longer defined you or categorized you. Therefore, aristocracies were erased, right? All these things that limited individuals were erased. And the process that caused that erasure was the frontier. You came here, and it wasn't your bloodlines that got you what you wanted. It was that your own pluck, your own luck, right? So in essence, what you created was a more egalitarian world, because it doesn't matter what your bloodline is. You've got to get out here and cut down the trees and plant the crops and survive. Does that make sense? So the phrase was kind of like the frontier brought this European over and broke the cake of custom, broke that European down. And that American figure kind of descended almost to a primitive state, almost like Native Americans, right? And then through the frontier process, built himself up into this American over the long haul. And so we've got these various stages of, if we were to think about, and this is kind of his theory. I know I'm digressing, but I want you to understand this is never brought it backwards. So if we've got the United States like this, or North America, and the European comes over, and this is your first frontier, and then you got another frontier line, and you got another frontier line like this. And so they come in here, and this is like the fur trade, and then they go here, and that's now the new frontier fur trade line. So they keep going, and they're always out here where they're meeting savagery versus civilization, right? At that line right there. And that's a point where you break it down. And so you're always getting into this frontier, and then here's where you break it down. Well, this, what was once the fur trade frontier here, now becomes maybe the cattle frontier. And what becomes maybe now the mining frontier. And ultimately you get to back to the urban frontier. So what was once the fur trade frontier, now is the urban frontier. And you think about each one of these as a stage of development of a society, and along the way, of course, you're creating, he would argue, democratic institutions like a constitutional government, right? Things of this nature. Does this make sense? So, but the idea, coming back to it, is that this frontier process, which broke down the European and gave birth to a new American, we need that. If this process ceases to exist, some in this day, around 1900, are saying, if we no longer have a frontier, then we're no longer going to be American. That frontier is what gave us the competition and created that Yankee ingenuity and Puritan work ethic and an egalitarian society. And if we take the frontier out of that, then all that may disappear, right? What made America America, the frontier's gone, then America's going to cease being what it is. So now that's not that we find out that that doesn't happen, but that doesn't matter. At that time, you're thinking that. And Theodore Roosevelt is thinking this, and Owen Wister is thinking this, and Alfred T. Mahan is thinking. I mean, all these movers and shakers in American politics and culture and art and philosophy are all thinking this. Everybody's on board with this. And so your logic then is, well, if we've ran out of frontier space here on the mainland, well, then we got to take our frontier elsewhere, or else we will atrophy and die as a nation. Right? We have to remain vigorous. We have to remain in a process of conquest. We may have run out of Indian wars, but damn it, we can sure get into the Philippines. Right? And so that's driving us in many ways, this fear of the end of the frontier, and that what will end up in Theodore Roosevelt's word, we'll turn into a big namby-pamby nation if we don't constantly test our muscle in battle and conquest and things of this nature. So that's a deep ideological concept that's coming into play here that's causing people to look beyond our borders. So there's that. Then, of course, there's the obvious one of new markets. We're an expanding economic empire. We've got to find places to sell our goods, right? We need raw resources to feed our engines of industry. And so that's definitely an important one. Let me give you just some stats. I think, I've got them right here. So we've got new markets, and of course, American exports are going to be part of that. So I've got them here. Look at what we're exporting. 1870, $390 million worth of product. 1890, look at that. Oh my gosh. And then by 1900, 1.4 billion. This is an era when we as a nation are finally getting that mode of we are exporting more than we're going to import. I mean, we're also changing our place of power in the globe economically. So again, overseas markets and exports in that regards are all important to this. And so those new markets, where is this product going? Well, it's going to a lot of what we would think of at that time as third world markets. It's going into Asia, it's going to Latin America, going into Africa. Whether it's copper or whether it's grain or whatever it is, we are expanding that way. So I just want you to understand there's a multitude of M factors or causes that are causing us as a nation to start to look beyond our borders, right? Again, some of them are economic, some are philosophical, some are political, right? In fact, here's kind of the diplomatic one or the political one here, is that we're not the only nation state that's getting involved in this process. Let's just call it what it is, colonization, right? Because we are at, say, around 1900, I'm just going to round it that way, we're at the very tail end of what has been about a 400 to 450 year scramble for empire. Ever since Columbus encountered the New World, we can even take it back a little earlier to Prince Henry the Navigator, in the mid 1400s, and the movement down Africa and getting into the trade in India and places like that. Europe has been on a scramble to get the globe under its control, right? So France has ventured out, England's ventured out, So we've had that. We understand this, right? This globalism, this imperialism that's going on. Well, what we've also got to understand is, as we get to the 1900s, there's some new players in this game. And some of those new players are going to include Germany and Austria-Hungary and the United States. These are all nation states that have kind of finally come into their being, right? Kind of got their political shit together. Their economic foundation is becoming stable enough. And once those nation states get to that point, they can go, oh, now we've got to do what England and France and Spain and Portugal and the Dutch have done. We need to get our colonies too, because having colonies is what defines you as a powerful nation, right? And so what we are, along with Germany and others, are latecomers to this worldwide scramble. And we're just, basically, we're along with others saying, what colonial crumbs can we pick up, right? Because the big stuff's gone, right? So that's what's going on here, is that we're being motivated for this last bit of these colonial opportunities. And we're certainly being spurred on by business interests that want to tap into those markets and such like that. So just understand, we've got all these things going on that are moving us in this direction. Well, here's some things that in fact, I kind of got ahead of myself with this over here. But one of the other things we've got to understand is that it's the intellectual currents. And like I said, I did get ahead of myself. But we'll just hit the high points really quick here and plug TR and stuff back in. But one of the things that's developed in the globe, especially in Western culture and in America as well, are these new intellectual currents, and they have been drawing upon the ideas of Darwinism. Now, Darwinism, we understand, let's just make it as, what is it that Chucky gave us, right? Little Chucky Darwin, he gave us survival of the fittest, right? And by natural selection, this is how species have evolved and dominate in their given little worlds, right? Well, we understand that idea of survival of the fittest has been applied to other kind of institutions or peoples, right? Gone from the animal world maybe into the human world. And so there's an intellectual current, again, drawing on the concepts of Darwinism, that are basically calling for the triumph of the fit, right? That there are superior peoples over others. And what's going on here is you've got the triumph of the fit and the elimination of the unfit. And it's just the natural process that, as Western Europeans, we often think of ourselves, well, we're the cat's meow. We're always the superior race. I mean, it's certainly some gross racial-based, what we call it, ethnocentrism, right? But that's motivating us. And coming back to that ideology, Theodore Roosevelt and many others apply this idea of these Darwinian concepts to our imperial process. And he would say this is Theodore Roosevelt, our president, promoting this idea, and he said this: in this world, the nation that has trained itself to a career of unwarlike and isolated ease is bound in the end to go down before other nations which have not lost the manly and adventurous qualities. End of quote. Think about that. So he's basically saying, if you want to isolate yourself and sit on your laurels and get fat and lazy, well, then just be prepared to be conquered eventually by a more powerful, more warlike, more expansive society. And so he's saying to Americans, look, we can't afford to sit on our laurels. We've got to keep going. I don't know if you know anything about Theodore Roosevelt. I know I'm going to digress for a second. But this is to the core. This is to the core of who Theodore Roosevelt is. He grew up in a very entitled society. I mean, he was of New York's elite society, the Roosevelts, wealthy. But what had happened to him is he, on the same day, had lost both his wife and his mother to death. And it broke him. He'd been kind of an up-and-coming politician. And so he kind of turned his back on that elitist world for a little while and went into the Dakotas and took up cattle ranching, right? Hanging out with cowboys and old mountain men, things of this nature. And I forgot to say that when he grew up in New York, he was an Ivy Leaguer. He went to Harvard, places like this. He was sickly, weak, nearsighted. I mean, he was just somebody that you always getting picked on, He gets out, but weak is the key thing here. He went out of the Dakotas, and in his time pretending to be a cowboy and hanging out with these ruffians of sorts, he built himself up physically and emotionally and psychologically. And the whole idea of speak softly and carry a big stick, which he's known for saying, well, yeah, you can have comportment, but carry a big stick and beat the shit out of anybody. The idea is that he built himself up, and he's and now he's this vigorous. That's why he's always off hunting. I don't know if you ever know this. The guy's always off blasting animals in Africa or in the Amazon or something like that. He's always trying to prove his masculinity, right? Well, he's like going, if I can do this, if I can go from a sick and weakly individual by engaging in the strenuous life, that was his phrase, the strenuous life, pushing yourself. If I can do it as an individual, why can't we as a nation think and do in the same way? So he's applying the strenuous life component here. He's like saying, we can't set our laurels, we've got to be strenuous, we've got to constantly engage in conflict and conquest, and that's driving us. Underpinning this issue of this strenuous life and engaging in this to build ourselves up strong is an issue of not only the issue of Anglo-American superiority or Anglo-Saxon superiority, but also the fear of the bloodlines of America being adulterated by, and we've got this with this immigrant influx, that if we don't watch our bloodlines, we'll be turned into this kind of mongrel race. So we got to protect that as well. But if we are also the superior Anglo-Saxon race, and he would say America is the pinnacle of that, right? Down the road, Hitler will try to do that with Germans as being the Aryan, the superior race. We're already doing that as Americans. That what we need to do, if we're the superior people, is we need to get out there and protect these inferior people from making stupid mistakes, right? So remember that paternalism that exists between the United States and Native Americans? Like, well, we're going to take their lands, but we're going to take care of them. We'll be the parent-child relationship. We are starting to do that looking at other peoples, especially in the Pacific Rim, that they need our help. They are just too stupid to know that they need our help, so we're going to go in there and make sure that they get our help because, God damn it, they need some capitalism and they need some democracy and they need some Jesus because those things are what define a superior society, right? And so we're going to export those commodities along with copper and bananas or whatever else. So, again, that's another thing that's moving us is this idea that if we're the educated and superior people, we need to help the unlettered out there. So there's that ideological or intellectual current. And then here's one I already hinted at already. There's a strong religious current that we've got to get into overseas settlement, or not settlement, but colonization. Because, I said this earlier, because they need Jesus, right? If they don't have Jesus, then, oh my gosh, they're savages, they're infidels or things of that nature. And so you've got that going on in America as well. This guy, Josiah Strong, he's a minister and he's a fervent advocate of expansionism. But his idea is that we've got to expand missionary work, not necessarily commercial endeavors, right, or to keep us as a strong nation is strenuous life. But he's saying we've got to do this in order to help other peoples, uplift them. And his book, Our Country, published in 1885, is basically saying this, that we've got to, as part of our nation's mission, we've got to involve ourselves in this missionary work. And he would argue in Our Country that materialism and Christianity together were evidences or the hallmarks of a superior, God-loved society, right? But why else would we not have all this opulence and greatness and a democracy and wealth if we weren't God's chosen? He's blessed us that way because we're His chosen people. So what we need to do is export, he would argue, export both this materialism as well as this Christianity abroad to help uplift these people, along with the Word of God, right? All these things work in tandem. And so again, he would say, it is our duty as God's favored race to engage in this process of expanding wealth and Christianity. So again, you think about all these ingredients that are motivating us as a nation to expand outward, it's coming from all directions. And so one of the early lures that we're going to have getting us into this chase for these enclaves is going to be Hawaii. And Hawaii, if you guys don't understand where it's located, it's just not quite, but let's consider it smack dab in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It has, since the years of Captain Cook and its discovery, nation states have understood its vital importance if you want to reach into the Pacific Rim. And when I say Pacific Rim, I mean all the islands, all the Asiatic components, and all the markets that come with that. That you need Hawaii. So Hawaii is on the radar screen of America. It's a very tempting, let's think of it as a way station for merchant marine activity, as maybe even military marine activity. It's a halfway point to the Asiatic markets. And has, as I was alluded to, is for the longest time been known as the crossroads of the Pacific. So we definitely have interests there. So do other nation states like England, Germany, Russia. Any one of these nation states that's involved in colonization of the Pacific Rim want Hawaii, right? It's a no-brainer, right? How do we get it? How does America end up with this and not say England or France or Russia or China, for that matter, who's also engaging in some serious Pacific trades? We get into Hawaii early on in the 1920s, and part of that is because of the missionary effort. There is a substantial missionary energy in America based out of New England in groups like the American Board of Commissioner of Foreign Missions, other missionary groups. And let's think in the early American West experience, we've seen missionaries from the ABCFM, let's go, the American Board of Commissioner of Foreign Missions, extending the Word of God to all sorts of indigenous peoples. Some of the earliest colonizers in Oregon, in the Willamette Valley, Narcissa Whitman and the Spaldings. These are missionaries of the ABCFM. So you have to understand, at the same time as we're sending missionaries, America is, to Indians in the Pacific Northwest, into California, places, we're also sending missionaries into Hawaii, into the Philippines, into all these places where indigenous peoples have dominated. So understand that this is not a single moment. These missionaries, it's going on all over, right? But we send in these missionaries, and the idea, of course, is to convert them to Christianity. And what you're doing is trying to convert these people. Well, at the same time, what these missionaries are doing is revealing to the world the possibilities of Hawaii. Because they're writing their letters and they're writing the reports, and these letters and reports are going back to Boston and getting put in the newspapers and broadcast nationally about, oh my God, this place, it's 75 degrees year round. And you can grow all sorts of tropical goods here, like sugar and pineapple, and this would be a super great place to colonize them. So they're promoting this idea of America ought to get its grubby hands in here, and it's going to start attracting not American missionaries, but it's going to start attracting American colonizers, entrepreneurs, families like the Doles. Anybody ever heard of the Doles, right? Can't eat anything tropical without eating something Dole, right? A banana or pineapple stuff. The Dole plantation is still on the island of Oahu. I don't know, has anybody ever been to that one? Okay, yeah, you can go to that little thing, poke your head through, look through the pineapple exhibition, right? And then poke your head through the little thing and pretend you're that kind of nonsense. All right. But imagine the islands now being just monopolized by these kind of enterprises. Or there's the Parker Ranch on the Big Island. That still is, I think, considered one of the largest cattle operations in the world. And the idea is that you're raising beef and you're exporting that beef, throughout the Pacific Rim and making profit that way. Parker Ranch is still there to this day. So I'm just saying, you're attracting these entrepreneurs and these settlers. What's going to happen is that's going to grow slowly, but in the post-Civil War era, what you're going to start to see really is the focus on sugar and this massive growing white population that will eventually overthrow and seize control of the islands, overthrow the monarchy there. And that's not that they overrank in terms of numbers the Hawaiians. There's more Hawaiians than there are whites, but what the white population is able to do is, like I said, this gain minority rule. And their whole premise for this is that they're driven by an economic foundation. Sugar is a key thing here. Ultimately, it's a great story, and I'd love to spend more time on it, but what's going to happen is this white population is going to come in and force David Kalakaua, who is the monarch of the islands, who has modeled he's like the descendant of Kamehameha, first, second, third, and others, and he has been the monarch descendant, the bloodline descendant, and he set up a monarchy and modeled after the English model. So he's got a palace, the Iolani Palace. I mean, it's got electricity. I mean, it's incredible, and they are recognized. The Hawaiian Kingdom is recognized by a lot of these other nation states, right? But what's going to happen is white minority is going to storm the palace and go on in and hold him at bayonet point and force him to sign this new constitution that's going to kind of depose his power and put these whites in more power. He will die. It'll kind of break his heart eventually, and he'll die. And his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, will take over, and she will be part of a resistance movement. But in the end run, it's going to be the white population that will seize control of the islands and then then annex the islands. And this is all done illegally. If you take a look at the history, at the documentation, everything that the United States has seized control of Hawaii illegally, right? So it's massive. It's just a lawsuit waiting to be finalized, but I don't know if it'll ever will be because of all the monies we've got involved there. I mean, it's just, and our naval station there at Oahu. But we annexed Hawaii in 1898, and of course this becomes our major, we control the crossroads of the Pacific as a nation state, right? We've got, of course Pearl Harbor is going to be elemental to this, but we're able to now dominate the Pacific shipping and naval effort that way. So that gets us going. That lure of Hawaii puts us in a very advantageous position to now start to reach further. If we've got a place like Hawaii, and these things are all going on about the same time, as we are gaining control of Hawaii, we are also changing our military philosophy of the day. And that is a movement towards a new large navy. Up to this point, America's really been a land-based military society. Our wars have been, let's see, the Revolutionary War, land-based, right? For the most part. The British may have sailed a bunch of troops over, but most of the fighting goes on land because we have a weak navy. War of 1812, much the same thing. The Civil War, we've got a few naval blockades and stuff, but it really is a land-based conflict. War with Mexico, definitely land-based, right? Wars with the Indians, totally land. The Indians don't have any freaking navy, right? So I want you to understand we've been a land-based military society. But the minute we start thinking abroad, beyond our contiguous boundaries, we've got to start considering a navy. So we start shifting towards that. And we will go from a society that is really a nothing on the radar screen in terms of maritime military power to quickly becoming one of the world's dominating military powers. And again, things like Pearl Harbor and such like this are helping in this process. So this new large navy concept becomes part of how are we going to expand and control our colonial efforts. We need the navies to do this. And so in the 1880s and on to the 1890s, this new philosophy begins to become part of our new military philosophy. And that we need a strong, fast, significant fleet in order to, as the argument was in the day, to protect our interests abroad. And this leads us into kind of a new phase, and that is the phase of the big ships, the battleships, right? We think about our Navy today. Battleships, aircraft carriers, support fleet, but nobody's thinking, especially not aircraft carriers at this time, it's really battleships. But the idea was you've got to build up this Navy that will be capable of challenging other nation states who are engaging in colonial efforts. So if Germany is rearing its head somewhere, we need to have a strong enough navy to challenge it, say, in the Philippines. If Spain is wanting to somehow hold on to, or they're not really expanding, they're kind of on the way out, but we need to be able to challenge them. We need a navy to do that. So the guy that's going to lead us down this path is Alfred T. Mahan right here. And I know I mentioned him just a few minutes ago, but he's the guy that's going to give us this new philosophy of an expanded navy. And his philosophy, just follow me on this, boom, 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 like this, is that he's saying this, that our industrialism and our agricultural growth, and we've been expanding our agricultural product mightily if we think about the American West, what that has led to is expanded markets. We can now sell our food and our manufactured goods abroad, right? Now that idea of bringing about new markets means that we've got to be involved in distant parts of the world, distant ports, so to say. Reaching those ports or those markets abroad means that we have to expand our merchant fleet, right? No duh. We got to load up the ships and sail that crap over there. And what we need, if we've got to expand our merchant fleet to carry all that product, is we need a naval fleet expanded to protect that merchant fleet. All right? If we've got now this naval force that we're expanding, that is going to require coaling stations and repair yards and things of that nature beyond our borders. So that means reaching into the Pacific Rim. That's going to require colonies, right? And basically those colonies are going to end up being strategic bases and the foundation of American power abroad. So this is why Guam, Midway, America, Samoa, Hawaii, other places like this, because now we need them if we're going to continue down this path. And in essence, what he's saying, we've got to win this race for empire, do it with a big navy. So we go from a frontier military society. Think about it. Troops like at Fort Sill, Fort Cobb, Fort Douglas in Utah, Fort Laramie in Wyoming, with a few cavalry soldiers biding their time, and going after Indians. Because remember, this is going on at the same time as all of a sudden we've got to now concern ourselves with not just dealing with Native Americans and a few little uprisings, but now we've got to quickly expand our navy. And so we by 1900, become the third largest naval power in the world. Now consider that. That's incredible. We're going from nothing to the third largest. And how do we do it? Well, because we are in the throes of an industrial revolution. We've got all the steel, we've got all the raw resources, we've got all the labor, we've got all the investment, we got the liquid capital. All these things are coming together at the same time. See, we're building rails, we're building skyscrapers, and we're building navies. I mean, it's all happening at the same time. It's just so dynamic, right? So we've got this now. What are we going to do with it? Well, damn it, let's go piss somebody off. Let's go take over. So if you've got big guns, you got to go pick a fight. So we're going to get into a war with Spain. The Spanish-American War. Now, understand, this is a brief little war. It's like a little, just nothing. It really is almost nothing in many ways in terms of conflict. The armed conflict itself. That when we look at it compared to World War I or World War II or Vietnam or Korea or even the Indian Wars. I mean, this one is pretty insignificant in terms of, if we want to think about it in terms of the conflict itself. What it accomplishes for us, though, is massive, right? Now, this was a war called the Splendid Little War by Theodore Roosevelt. That's what he called it. It's a splendid little war, right? But what does it do for us? And some of the things that's very important is, I've got this. At the end of the war, number one is it's built up American confidence. This thing only lasts just a handful of weeks, or about, 13 or 14 weeks or something like that, right? But in the end, it's like, we just went toe-to-toe with Spain. We kicked Spain's ass. We are somebody. It's almost like our, welcome, we're here, America. We don't screw with this kind of approach. So it's changing our place. As how the world perceives us, how we perceive ourselves in the world, right? It broke down our insular pattern. We've been a society living within this, we like it. We like Pacific and Atlantic Oceans as isolation, so we're not involved in all this crap going on in other nation states, but all of a sudden, this war breaks those down, and we're now part of the global scheme of things, right? We're no longer just isolated, kind of the direction that current president wants to take us, right, is isolationism. Right? Again, reshaping our view of ourselves in the world, raising that controversial ideal, and coming back to that theme is, we're now calling colonial powers, right? We're puking up in our mouth that heritage, right? And moving ourselves as a major player that will continue to grow throughout the 20th century. So this war is important as a springboard to a lot of this. How do we get into this war? So it does so much for us, let's say, image-wise and ideologically and even in literal power down the road. How do we get into this war in the first place? Well, the war becomes initially a war for principle, right? Got to prove ourselves. So what we've got is, it starts off down in Cuba, Puerto Rico. These are the last holdings, let's say, in what we think of as North America, of Spain, right? Mexico has already gained its independence. This is the last Spanish enclave. What's going on there, though, is because these islands are sitting so close to the United States and ideas of independence, democracy, and, anti-imperialism are going on, that you've got rebellions. You've got peoples on those islands saying, we want our freedom from Spain, just like Mexico's gained its freedom from Spain, and so many other nation states have gained their independence. We want that, too. So there starts to be these rebellions, these anti-Spanish movements, and some of them are getting quite violent with guerrilla troop warfare and things of this nature. So what happens is Spain doesn't want to lose its very last of its colonial holdings, and so it's going to dig in its heels. It's going to ship almost 250,000 troops, Spanish troops, off to these islands to put down these rebellions, to put down the guerrilla warfare that's going on here. What's going to happen, though, is these guerrilla warriors, right? They're going to do a lot of the hit. That's what guerrilla warfare is, hit and run, right? You're not going to do mass troops. You're going to do some hit and run. As a result of that, what Spain's going to do is it's going to engage in what we call a reconcentration policy. It will start to round up these citizens of these islands and put them in kind of concentration camps, right? Controlling that population so that it can't engage in this guerrilla warfare. And as a result of that, thousands and thousands of Cubanos and Puerto Ricans, they begin to die in these camps. I mean, this is horrific. Now, the other thing that's going on here is that America has interests. We have financial interests, plantations and economic investments and things of this nature. So we don't like this. This is kind of, in many ways, an assault against our economic interests and an assault or creating, let me go back. Maybe it's more of the problem of economic instability and how it can impact our investments there. But also, we jump on this pedestal of Republican Democratic ideology and say, well, wait a minute, you can't be treating people like that. You need to be more fair like us. And so we go in there and we start to flex our muscle just a little bit to send the message to Spain. You need to stop this. You need to stop treating these people this way, and you need to, So we sail in a big bad battleship, one of our new big Alfred T. Mahan guns, right? We sail that right into the harbor there at Havana. And as we know, what happens is that battleship Maine will blow up and sink there in Havana Harbor, right? Now, here's the deal. We automatically go, those damn Spaniards, they torpedoed our ship, one of our big new ships, right? You can't do that. What do we know happened? You guys remember from your reading? Did the Spaniards attack the Maine? No. A boiler blew up. Bad technology, right? And we learned this down the road, but the reality is we went to a quick conclusion. And we went ahead and blamed Spain for that explosion. And quickly what happens is President McKinley presses Spain for the end of its policies of reconcentration, pushes them that they need to move closer to independence for Cuba and places like this. And because we're pushing Spain, Spain finally just goes, to hell with you. And they just cut off diplomatic relations. Go, we're not going to listen to you. You can't tell us how to run our country. And so they cut off communications with us. Well, what do? Well, damn it. We go ahead and then bring in more of our fleet and we surround the islands. We're going to cut them off, right? We've got a blockade going. And the next thing you know is a blockade now leads to a declaration of war. Bam, we are into war with Spain, right? Spain, who in its colonial effort is really on life support and on its way out. America, who's now just starting to get its foot into imperialism, into colonialism, and they're the new rising component here. And we've got now, as Theodore Roosevelt would call it, our splendid little war, right? 10 weeks long. When we get in this war, we are not ready for it. We may have a big-ass navy, but one thing we don't have is an army that can now deal with conquest on land. That is conquest of Cuba, right? Or other places that we may be engaged with Spain. And so the minute this war is declared, we find ourselves in a position of having to raise an army. Now, what do we have? We've got roughly, at the time of the war's declaration, only about 28,000 soldiers in our United States Army. Think about that. Only about 28,000. That's officers and enlisted men. That's so small. See, we've gone to this big Navy, right? Because we're now reaching out. But we don't need an army because we're busy dealing in oceanic maritime issues. We don't need an army. Our army at home is kind of hanging out at Fort Sill just in case there's an Indian issue that comes up. What else do we need, right? But all of a sudden we find ourselves needing a new, modern, large army. And so McKinley almost after he declares war with Spain, says, and we need an army. So he calls for volunteerism. And he says, we need 125,000 American men to come join the United States Army so that we can engage in this war. And do you know how many, let me see if I've got it up here. You know how many men he gets with this volunteerism? Right? It's not draft, it's volunteer. Right? It's all volunteer. So he asks for 125,000, he gets over 1 million. Now consider that. What's going on in the American mind? Where you've got all these young men saying, damn it, I got to go off to war. Right? This is what's going on. And one of those individuals is Theodore Roosevelt himself. He is, at this time, he is Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Right? He's worked himself deep into the kind of the Washington, D.C. circle by this. He's come back from Dakotas and stuff like that. And so he's Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And he resigns his commission so he can then go and form his own volunteer cavalry unit. And that becomes known as the Rough Rider. Have you guys ever heard of the Rough Riders, right? So he forms the Rough Riders, let me get the official name if I've got it here. The United States, the first United States Volunteer Cavalry. Well, there it is. I think it says it already. And it's made up of all sorts of, from an odd cross-section of American society. And I'm just using him as an example, and the Rough Riders as an example, because we got volunteerism going all over the board. But the Rough Riders is unique. So part of it is made up of Native Americans here from Oklahoma Territory. Part of it's made up from old cowboys from Oklahoma Territory, New Mexican Territory, adventurers. The other half of it is made up of young men out of the Ivy League schools like Harvard and Yale. This is a weird mix, a cross-section of American society, right? So then we have to ask ourselves the question, why? Why do you get all these different peoples engaged in this? Well, maybe for cowboys or those that had been involved in the Indian Wars in the late 1800s, this is what we're good at. We're good old days. Let's go grab a horse and go shoot somebody, right? Again, we got Native Americans from the Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation that are part of this fighting force. But then you got to ask yourselves, what about these Ivy League boys? What are they doing this for? Go back to think, what have I said about Theodore Roosevelt? What motivates him? What is his base ideology? What?
The masculinity.
Masculinity. That you got to prove yourself through conflict, through combat, right? Conquest. And so you got all these Ivy Leaguers who've grown up, in the cuddle of mom's bosom and the wealth of daddy's money, right? And they've never tasted anything like that. Now they've heard, again, maybe all these stories, this romanticism of going back to Civil War, where you've got all these great heroic deeds by George Armstrong Custer or Jeb Stuart or McClellan or whoever. And so we are, in the society, we still are deeply romanced by warfare. All right? The kind of, again, gaining honor and identity out of it. So these young men go running in droves to join this because, hey, this is a way I could show my masculinity. Same reason that these same young men are getting involved in boxing and playing football in its earlier stages. Football, people died on the gridiron, right? It was a violent sport. It was almost outlawed. It was almost outlawed, done away with, because it was a way of proving your masculinity in the ring or on the gridiron. But now they got an idea, they can go out of this idea of romanticism. And they engage in this. Now I'm just going to throw out... there is another element that's going to be part of this fighting force, and that is African Americans. They will make up a significant part of this new, not his Rough Riders, but part of the American fighting force. And they gained distinction during this war because the Spaniards called them smoked Yankees. We're thinking about troops out of the Fort Sill, like the 9th and 10th Cavalry or the 13th and 14th Infantry units and such. These guys go and they prove themselves mightily on the battlefield. And again, they get called these smoked Yankees for their success. In fact, 10,000 troops made up the fighting force there on the island of Cuba. Anyway, I digress for a second. Now, No. One thing I want to throw out there is, regardless of how successful the African Americans were, the problem is in America, we are still dealing with a segregated society, right? African Americans are still looked down upon and treated as an inferior population, even though they're fighting for independence and liberty and things of this nature. African Americans who came out of the West, let's say out of Fort Sill, taking the trains towards the east, going through the southern tier of the nation, right, to go get training and then embark, from Florida to Cuba for the conflict, were met initially in the West by cheers, but as they got deeper in the South, by jeers, right, and facing segregation. And as one African American called, his name was Sergeant Frank Pullen, he said this: "It mattered not if we were soldiers of the United States Army and going to fight for the honor of our country. We was niggas," as they called us, and treated us with contempt in such ways again and again, right? So we're in the midst of all this imperialism and this talk about equality and protecting rights, and at the same time we're engaging in this issue of inequality at home, even within our ranks. Well, just throwing a few of those things. We get into this war, we assemble these troops, but the war itself is very brief. Again, only about 113 days, 10 weeks overall. We've got Commodore George Dewey over in the Pacific realm. This war reaches deep into the Pacific, as well as, down, if we think about it, in the Caribbean, in the Caribbean region. But he goes ahead and he sails his ships into Manila Bay and takes that. And he does so very quickly because the Germans are also, lurking throughout the Pacific, trying to get places like Midway, like Guam, like the Philippines, because they too want to get into this imperialism. And we get in there and we take it pretty quick. Take that from Spain. We also, of course, have the Navy and Army forces dealing with Cuba and Puerto Rico. Again, so this is kind of a global conflict. It's very brief. Like I said, 113 days. What we suffer as a nation is about 5,000 American deaths, so it's very small, right? Of that 5,000, only about 375 died in battle. The rest of them die from disease. You can imagine the malaria and the scurvy and all this kind of stuff, the yellow fever, and accidents. These are the things that tended to hit you more than anything. I mean, that was the fear. So we win the war, and so it's a no-brainer. If you want to get a little bit more into the war, go ahead and read the chapter. But the important thing is after the war's success for us, and we acquire these Spanish territories, it then puts us into a deep ideological conflict or conundrum as a nation. Because what happens is we as a nation then have to have this debate in our minds, in our philosophies, in our society about what are we as an America becoming? Again, something very new. Think about Industrial Revolution taking us in a new direction, immigration changing us in terms of demographics and religious ideologies, with Catholicism, Judaism, we're growing cities. Remember, all these turns are going on. One more turn is that, again, are we going to become a colonizing power and leave our American heritage as a society of independence and opportunity and liberty? Are we now going to go in an opposite direction? And the Philippines becomes kind of the focus of this issue of America now expanding its territories and becoming a colonizing power. Why the Philippines and not, say, Cuba? Well, the issue is this, is definitely overall there grows within America, because of the success of the war, a responsibility due to our expansion. If we're going to take control of these, we have a responsibility over these peoples, over these lands, right? And there becomes some of the debate. Well, Cuba doesn't fall into this because Cuba immediately got its independence. Remember, we got into this war because Spain, part of the reason was because Spain was not providing independent, equal opportunity, a democratic society for those Cubanos. So we go, well, we got it. We'll give you guys your independence like you were wanting. So we do that. The United States got Puerto Rico and Guam and those kind of things. Those places just sat out there in terms of their status. But the Philippines puts us in a conundrum. With the Philippines, our question is this. Okay, we won it from Spain. What do we do with it? Do we give it back to Spain? No. Do we give it to another nation state? Hell no, because that would undermine our efforts. Or do we keep it? Right? So do we give it back? Do we give it away? Or do we keep it? And that becomes the debate. And so you've got pro-annexationists and anti-annexationists in America. So we're divided over this issue. Right? Do we annex it and bring it in or not? Right? And so those on the pro-annexationist side are going to definitely be supported by religious groups. Let's say like at Josiah Strong. Hell yeah, we need that. We need to give Jesus to all those Filipinos, right? They need that, right? There's going to be merchant industrialists that go, hell yeah, we need it. We need more markets. We need to sell our product, right? You've got... so I come back. You got kind of these elements that are pushing in that direction, but then you've also got the anti-annexationists. A lot of those are racists. They're like going, hell no, why do we need the Philippines? Why would we want the Philippines? That's bringing in another, these pure bloods. Let's go with what mudbloods and what was it out of Harry Potter? Mudbloods and muggles and what's a pure blood? Anyway, but the whole Malfoy family, right? That kind of nonsense. So the idea is that in America you've got this idea of pure blood. You don't want to adulterate it by mixing with this what we're deeming as a mongrel indigenous race, right? We want to graft that into ours. Remember I talked about that race purity mentality that exists out there. So you've got those racists out there saying, no, we're not ready to take responsibility for that. And then there's others that would say in this whole process of, well, to do so, okay, so there's the racist component, non-annexationist. Another would say, look, we're not, to do so would violate our principles as a nation. Again, the idea that we'd be puking up our heritage of a people that promote independence and self-determination. There's labor leaders who would say, hell no, we don't need this because that's going to create cheap labor sources that will undermine American laborers. Others are arguing if we take control of these islands, well, damn it, that's more taxes that's going to have to be levied because we're going to need an army and a navy and an administrative element there, and so the cost factors. So again, we've got all sorts of these debates that are going on, and I do come back to it. Are we a nation that's going to promote one thing, that is the idea of people having self-determination and such, at the same time engaging in colonization where people retake their self-determination away? What's going to happen, though, in the end is that the annexationists are going to win out over the anti-annexationists. And we will, on February 6, 1899, go ahead and annex the Philippines and bring it under our control. And then, again, we'd ratify that treaty that way. And we move down a path that we have this point not really engaged in as a nation, right? It changes our identity. We are now an imperial power. We now are a colonizer. And we're going to keep doing we're now going to start reaching and we've already been doing it at this time, reaching into Latin America and starting to engage there in some ways. One of the byproducts, so we'll wrap it up really quick here. One of the byproducts in all this is that we take control of the Philippines, and immediately the Philippines are wanting their self-determination, and we get drug into a long-term guerrilla war against the Filipinos, right? And in fact, the Philippine-American War, unlike the Spanish-American War, is a hell of a lot longer and a hell of a lot more costlier. That war goes from the Filipino-American War, which we don't ever really talk about, goes from 1898 to 1902. And you've got all these Filipino insurgents in there that are wanting their independence, just like Cuba got. They don't want to be under American control, but we are going to go ahead and insist that they fall under our control. So for 3 years, we as the United States are engaged in a really incredible guerrilla warfare where we're going to have 4 times as many troops killed in the line of battle in the Philippines than we did in the Spanish-American War. another thing is it's going to be one of the first times in American military history that we are going to face Asian guerrilla warfare, right? And you have to understand, this is now going to be a major thing for the United States military. We think about World War II and having to deal with the Japanese, as we get into the island hopping campaign. We get into Korea. We get into Vietnam, right? And Laos and Cambodia. We are beginning, because of us reaching into the Pacific Rim, we are now going to start engaging in, for almost a century now, this kind of guerrilla warfare. We suffered, in terms of American deaths on the battlefield, not, flat out casualties, about close to 4,500. What the Filipinos suffered, on the other hand, was, we estimate, between 50,000 to 200,000 deaths, casualties, because of this war. So, we had an incredible impact upon that population as we engaged in this war to sustain our colonial power over them, when all they were wanting, of course, was their independence and their self-determination. So what do we get out of this? And we'll wrap it up in this last second here, last minute or so. What happens out of this war is that we enter into the realm of empire. We now are having to engage in a role as a nation of paternalism. A paternalism over Guam, a paternalism over Puerto Rico, a paternalism over the Philippines and elsewhere. Over Hawaii, we have to conclude that in the process. And so we have taken on a new identity and a new role in the world. And another component of this is not only assume that paternalism that way and colonialism, but we also have sprung open the door for Asiatic trade. We now at this point become a major trade broker, trade partner, as we are reaching into the entire Pacific Rim. So again, industrialism and marketability are things that we are that have changed our nation and what we're expanding with it. So again, this is a massive turning point that we often don't consider the magnitude of it when we think about our nation and its destiny. Now, we've talked about a lot of change. If we want to think about this section that we've looked at, it's been about massive transformation of America. Whether it's acquiring the West and deposing Native Americans, expanding industrialization, transforming the South. Immigration, all these things. Next time we get into a lecture course, next time we got an exam. Next time we get to a lecture, what we want to do is say, how does it respond to these drastic changes? That's where we want to go kind of in the next section of the semester. All right. So, again, show up next time, blue book or two in hand, a pen, your 3x5 card, again, loaded with whatever you want to put on there, right? And I'll be honest, I've had students been very creative. They've gotten on their computers and used the smallest font that they can actually print and done their notes on that and glued on the card. I'm cool with that. For you can write small, whatever works, If you want to put just buzzwords on there, things of that nature, I honestly would recommend going over the questions and crafting your outlines, which I think you guys should have already been doing. How do you want to answer each one of these questions? Based on the lectures and the book readings. But I would maybe put those outlines on there so you've thought about what you want to touch on. Right? You've thought about the key people, the key events, key processes. You may want that outline to cue you in, because I guarantee once you get into this exam, sometimes you get distracted or you get too focused. You need something that keeps you on track, like a roadmap, right? So just be ready to come right furiously. Show me that you know your stuff. You guys got to now impress me. That's what I want from you. Impress me with your knowledge, okay? All right. Then I will see you for exams on Wednesday.
Did you fill out that sheet that I gave you last class? Oh wait, you already did that.
I think
the other teachers are the ones that
filled
out. And when you say
There you go.
which I went to tutoring for my perspective, so
Now say again, you did what?
I went to tutoring for my perspective
Okay.
to figure out like what it
Right.
was and what kind of goes behind it.
Right.
So I should